What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and it's time to talk about Automobilista 2 in the version 1.1.2 update that was released just earlier today as I record this, actually, otherwise known as the update where the Germans are in Belgium again. So I'm going to be covering this update sort of similar to what I've done for iRacing in particular in the past when they have their major updates, where I just kind of go through some of the major things with the changelog and just kind of give you an opinion, a thought on them. Not reading the full thing, you can find that all down in the description. This is more so aimed at the people who either they don't pay as much attention to this particular game for one reason or another, or alternatively maybe they kind of walked away and they're not up to date with what's happening and where the game is, and maybe there's a feature that they're waiting for it to be fixed and you find out through these videos. But anyways, let's begin. Let's go ahead and start with something that's not really a sexy feature, if you will, but it's something that I do think is very important and will be a fantastic thing to have in the future, and that relates to the live track, the track rubbering in and wetness and all that. Now the rain will actually properly wash away rubber, so they say, as well as the fact that they now behind the scenes have the ability to select different track grip presets, which they're working towards getting that to be something that we can select when we're setting up a race, which is something that is always been an issue with Madness Engine. That's been one of the major drawbacks with live track, as Slightly Mad Studios had done it, because you can't select track presets. You know, if you want to race on a green track or a fully rubbered in track, you've not really ever been able to do that properly, and this is a step towards getting that, and I think that is a very big thing, even though it may not necessarily sound like the coolest feature in a changelog, especially when there's Group C cars. Another group of not so sexy features, there's been some AI updates and sort of, again, behind the scenes type of things where they now have the ability to go ahead and set car parameters specifically to the car rather than having them applied to all cars, which means that they'll be able to better control things such as how much the drivers lift out of the throttle when going through puddles. That can very much differ from car to car, as we may have discovered on this channel, as well as how late they brake and how they go about the corners, because there is a massive difference. It's not one of those things where I feel like I've noticed a tremendous difference so far, although in some of my testing with the Formula V, which I'll talk about here in a moment, it does seem like they were braking in a more reasonable fashion, and I found them less awkward to drive around as I may have in the past, or in Automobilista 1, because that's just kind of a very unique car in the way you drive it. But yeah, nothing that I'm ready to say radically alters the game, but one of those things I do think is a major feature going forward, especially as we've seen in recent updates, previous updates, that they've had track-specific AI overrides in certain corners, and in those corners the AI performs much better. So I think this is one of those things where they're getting closer to just basically explicitly saying that this is how you're going to perform, and that's going to make the AI work better because it's going to give them more direct control over what is going on out there on the track, which should end up resulting in a better product in terms of the AI. They also mentioned that they've increased the AI driver's performance range, which should enable a more spread out field and should prevent the pack racing. However, in my experience, this is kind of sort of up in the air. Some cars, it feels like the pack is still the pack and the times are very close and compacted together, while some cars, for example the Group C cars, the field spreads out pretty substantially like you would expect. So I don't know if this is just something that's still a major work in progress type things and it hasn't fully been adjusted for all cars, or alternatively, if the Group C cars being the newest cars in the game, they've just had that extra thing baked into them from the start. But your mileage may vary, at least for now. Then we come to the physics things that have been updated. There's been a whole host of tire updates. Nothing, as far as I can tell, has been particularly hugely major, just a bunch of minor incremental stuff. Again, go ahead and check the full changelog down below if that is something that you want more detail on in terms of what vehicles. But two cars I want to go ahead and talk about because they did receive updates. First of all, we'll start with the modern Brazilian stock car. This car has had the tire carcass stiffness changed, and as far as I can tell, the way it feels is very much the same. It drives very much the same, but it seems to be a little bit more stable at the rear end than it was previously. And this, of course, was with a full-on, fully reset to default setup, just so we're clear. It's one of those things where I think if you went ahead and also tried to dial in more rear grip, as I suggest doing previously to this update, you would find the car also a good bit more stable than what it was before still. The other car I want to go ahead and talk about is the Formula V. This is a car that I haven't really driven all that much in Automobilista 2. When I have driven it before, it's kind of gone the way of either it feels like it has slick tires, or alternatively it feels like it has no tires. And it's always been one of those things that just kind of drives me up the walls, because in Automobilista 1 I enjoyed the car so much and it is so much fun over there. Here I finally feel like it's reached a legitimately enjoyable spot where it has that wonderful sensitivity to it, where it does exactly what you told it to do, for better or worse, but at the same time it isn't so punishing to where if you get something slightly wrong, the car just like explodes in an instant. Like, it is legitimately great to have the Formula V back in Automobilista 2, because it's so much fun. 90 horsepower is more than sufficient. There you go. There's been a couple of setup-related physics changes that have been done as well. The Mclaren F1 Gtr, the GT1 car, and then the CLK GTR, those have been updated to have a different gear ratio for the default setups. This is something I brought up in the forums, so thank you very much, Riza, for fixing this, because previously the default setups for the GT1 cars were absolutely terrible. The gear ratios were entirely wrong, and it screwed over racing with the AI, which is why I haven't done a video with them. But now that that has been addressed and the gear ratios are much more appropriate, fun, fun, fun. And along the same lines, the McLaren 720S GT3 has had its rear toe setting reevaluated, as previously it was set to toe out at the rear by default, which was causing some stability issues, apparently. Surprise, surprise. Last things on the physics front, kind of, sort of, they've gone ahead and added 2 new tire compounds for the modern prototypes, the GT cars and the Formula cars. Those would be wet weather tires. There's an intermediate tire now available, as well as the extreme tire. So as you'd expect, the intermediate tire is for when the conditions are damp enough for a tire that needs grooves, but not wet enough for a tire that's a full-on wet tire. But what I really want to talk about is the extreme tire, otherwise known as a full-on monsoon tire. I see you lurk in my videos, Riza Studios. Now, naturally, for scientific purposes, I went ahead and did some testing with them to evaluate what these tires are actually useful for, and I jumped to the 90s style V10 powered Formula 1 look-alike machine and found that, they serve a purpose. When you're set up to run in storm or thunderstorm conditions, when the track gets very, very super wet, the extreme weather tires are clearly superior to the wet weather tires. In particular, they're a lot less prone to hydroplaning, aquaplaning. You'll stay in control much more often. It makes the experience much more manageable. Now, that said, it's also a lot less fun because it's a lot less terrifying. Alrighty, let's go ahead and talk about that sweet, sweet content. And let's go ahead and start with the 1999 stock car Brazilian stock car, the Omega. Now, I'm not going to lie, I don't know anything about the car other than through the game, and obviously this chronologically fits in between the 1986 stock cars that were already in the game and then the 2015 stock cars that were already in the game, or the 2019, the previous generation of the Brazilian stock cars. Like, yeah, I understand it fits in there in that same series, and it's nice to have in that sense that it brings another generation in. I can understand that. But as for what this car is, it looks like a 1990s V8 supercar, but it is not a 1990s V8 supercar. And maybe that was part of my disappointment with this car, is not understanding what I was getting into. But 5-speed H-pattern gearbox, about 330, 350 horsepower thereabouts. It's one of those cars that plows like an absolute dump truck, and then you have to drive it with your right foot coming off of the corner, and you're doing the little slippy slide, elbows out. Like, you know, it's fun to drive in that sense, but at the same time, it's got too little power for the amount of tire that it has, but it has too little tire for the amount of power it has, if that makes any sense. It's one of those things where if the car had an extra 150 horsepower, it'd be about 10 billion% more fun as far as I'm concerned. But as it is now, you're not slippy slidey enough like with the old school, like the old stock cars that are already in the game. So it's just a very weird dynamic for me. Like, I can understand why people would like this and be attracted to it, and I think it would be one of those cars that, in terms of like a league racing environment, would be absolutely hilariously good fun for the people that are into it, but this just isn't my cup of tea. So there's that. Now on to something that is my cup of tea. It's time to talk about the Germans. The German god of Turbo Thunder has arrived. I mean, if the 91730 is going to be the Turbo Panzer, which is the greatest nickname for any race car ever, and it's not even close, the C9 deserves an honorable nickname as well, because it also similarly basically went full-on scorched earth in a class of sports car racing. Now, don't get it twisted. The thing goes, but it also handles, and it stops. Like, you know, this car was a competent, high-level performance machine, and while you think of 240 miles an hour down the Mulsanne straightaway when you think of a Sauber C9, Sauber Mercedes C9, and you think about the stupid amounts of power, the thing's got grip, all right? The thing's got downforce. It does what you expect it to do, given how fast these things were. Now, that said, it is an absolute ballistic missile. The thing's got so much power, it's got so much torque. The power overshadows everything else, even though the fact that the car handles competently and it stops competently, you still can't get around the engine because the engine just makes this thing what it is. I mean, you got so much torque. Spa is basically all third gear and fourth gear corners. You could go down to second. I mean, second might be the correct gear, quote unquote, but you might as well save the shift, keep it in third, make your job a little bit easier on the throttle, and just use the engine to your advantage and just torque all of the corners. Now, that said, yeah, the car is a bit of a it will keep you awake, all right? It's not easy to drive. With great power comes great responsibility. So enter the Porsche 962, which is a entirely different driving experience, and it's very, very different. The C9 is very much an attack dog that is eating your face off viciously, like as you're trying to be like, hey, stop eating my face. Whereas the 962 is more like the attack dog before he decided to eat your face off. Like, yeah, it's still got stupid amounts of power. It goes really quickly, and you know, it's got that 1980s technology thing going on. But at the same time, it is a much more friendly car to drive. In some ways, because of the comparative lack of torque in particular, yeah, you're going to have to do more shifts per lap than you might have to do in the C9, which technically might qualify as more work, but because of the fact that the engine is less explosive, it means that it is a good bit easier to handle. The C9 is fun because of the fact that it is a ballistic missile as a race car, essentially, whereas the 962 is more fun, just period, full stop, because it is a much more enjoyable car to drive because it isn't a ballistic missile on wheels. They are two very different experiences, even if they are in the same class. Now, in terms of lap times, the C9 is faster around Spa to the tune of 3 seconds at least in the testing that I did in comparable configurations between the two cars, and it seems to manifest itself most down the straightaways where the C9 is just a rocket ship and then some. This is to be expected. It reflects the real world. You know, by the time the C9 had arrived on the scene, the 962 was in the hands of the privateers and being developed and tweaked, and all the custom variants and flavorings that had arrived at that car to try and keep them more competitive. But even still, as history tells us, there was no touching the Mercedes. Now, in the forums, Riza Studios has mentioned that the 962 is going to end up getting a limited slip differential right now as I record this commentary. Currently it has a spool rear end, which means it has no differential, which means that you're going to get more understeer, you're going to get more power on oversteer in a car like this, where you're not likely to put in too little power, because you're not ever going to do that with a Group C car, which will make the car a little bit faster. It will bring the lap times closer together, but I just don't think that these two cars are directly comparable on lap times, nor really should they ever be expected to be, because that, again, would not reflect the reality. So with this said, now that I know that Riza Studios is definitely lurking my videos, give us the Jag. Now there is one other piece of content in this update, which would be 1993 Spa. We have the old school, well, not old school, but older school version of Spa with the good old bus stop as it was, you know, left, right, left thing, that action going on, the good bus stop that we all remember, or maybe don't all remember because it's been a long time since this was the layout that was raced. But it's one of those things where, again, Riza Studios adding in historic versions of tracks, something I always like to see, especially with a large focus on historic content, and having Group C cars that go with a layout of Spa that is more reminiscent of what was raced back in the day, and it looks more appropriate to that time frame. It just helps sell the experience and makes it more immersive than just the awkward historic racing thing that we all kind of just trick ourselves into thinking that we're doing when we're racing these old school cars around all these modern tracks with all the paved runoff and everything. It makes the experience that just that little bit better, and it's definitely appreciated. So overall, a host of smaller little changes today, but will hopefully end up becoming more important to the core gameplay in the future. A months down the line, year down the line, I think we'll see the results of these changes. And then, of course, on the content side of things, I can understand the appeal, especially within the Brazilian market, of the 99 stock car. Don't get me wrong, even if it doesn't resonate with me directly. And then, of course, the Group C cars, Historic Spa. I feel Historic Spa in particular, with a lot of the Formula 1 style cars that were already in the game, is a great addition to it to give it a period correct version of that track. And then, of course, Group C, well up my list of awesome cars, so I definitely will not complain. And hopefully we will see more of them. Just like hopefully we'll see more 90s GT1 stuff, because those are the two classes that are just like, I mean, you're not talking 90s champ car there, but you're getting close in my book. Like, you're definitely well up the pecking order there. So Riza Studios, give us the Jag. All right. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. Bye.